Out of all the shonen animes over the years, one of the most beloved continues to be One Piece, with the manga continuing to be the best seller in Japan, telling the story of Monkey D. Luffy with his crew of anime pirates fulfilling their dreams to find a treasure called the One Piece. I first heard about the franchise from an old Beckett magazine, which was popular at the time, especially if you liked Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh back in the day, where it shows off many of the main characters and the basics of the story. And I somehow misread Sanjay as being the chief instead of chef. Yeah, that was pretty awkward. It was a small article, with the anime in its early years, so I didn't get the impression it was that big of an anime enough to be compared to Dragon Ball Z. And that was a sneak peek I got before it was licensed. And this article is old, like they even called Robin by her former name. This article will be 2 decades old by now. Like, what is the actual One Piece? Is it a real thing or the friends he made along the way? Who the heck is Shanks? Should the race of Zoro's opponents be a point of concern? Why do these characters wear pants? Is Crocodile Luffy's mother? Is there some bimbification potion in the water of the Grand Line that gives all the female characters a good figure? Will Oda listen to the fans and put the Gummo Gummo no Bomb in action? How is it that in the early One Piece, Zoro's friend died by stairs, but Sanji isn't crippled by this? Now, speaking of early One Piece, getting into the story was always very hard to do. While the story did start in the late 90s, it didn't get localized in America until 2004. It was all dubbed by 4Kids, who also did Pokemon alongside other popular anime. Sounds good on paper, but the paper's on freaking fire, with the One Piece dub being seen as the worst dub ever. While the 4Kids dubs had their faults, they could still be enjoyed despite that, but the One Piece dub had all the worst elements rolled into one. Also, they aired the show on Sunday mornings, like who looks forward to Sundays? And while there was some good casting, that's very few and far between, where the rest of the voices just sound horrible. The worst is making Sanji sound like he had lung cancer despite smoking lollipops.
It's ungentlemanly to raise a hand against a lady.
Sanji, if you know what's good for you, just keep sucking your candy!
Please, you think your little threats scare me?
I theorized that it was supposed to be a cigarette joke, with uncut DVDs being planned so the joke could land. Or maybe he was supposed to be Italian so he sounds like Stallone, I have no clue. Imagine if they kept that voice in the later arcs. You're crazy if you think I'm gonna get married. Luffy doesn't take orders from anyone. He's gonna be king of the Oh my god, this freaking voice. It was a mess. And there's a lot of odder edits that did not go unnoticed. I thought the show would have been better if it weren't for the terrible dialogue. And I think that was the consensus most people had. And then people found out that fan subs exist. And they rewatched the show seeing it in a totally different light. Now eventually 4Kids did lose the license and Funimation took over, having a much better direction. There was also the manga distributed by Viz Media, which was out at the same time the 4Kids dub. There are some flaws in the translation, but as a whole it was alright. The point I'm getting here is that the 4Kids dub left a very horrible impression, with many people having to replace it with a sub, the redub, or the manga, or maybe even all three. And since this is one of the highest selling mangas in Japan, many people think One Piece would have been a lot more popular in the West if it weren't for the 4Kids early years. Though, oddly enough, as One Piece gets more serious, it does equally get more sillier. So many of the edits that 4Kids did not seem that out of place. Like this hammer would seem like something that Oda would make up. Or the poison suction cups. And Sanji slurping on a lollipop actually does make more sense as a quirk than him ruining his taste buds with cigarettes. Except for renaming Ace Trace. Like, what the hell was up with that? By now, the dub was completely forgotten in time. But that's easier to say now because Funimation redid everything. The Funimation dub continues during the Jaya arc, which is fitting because that's the moment where the seeds get planted for later. So about that, in more recent years, One Piece has a different curse. Not by the format how the show is presented, but by the show itself. One Piece has over 1,000 episodes and chapters. Sure, this does technically apply to Bleach and Naruto too, but One Piece was around a lot longer than they were, so it all adds up over time. Now, JoJo almost has just as much when it comes to manga, but there has been numerous animes throughout the years, but it's safe to say that One Piece has a lot more. But in actuality, One Piece is currently beaten out by Pokemon by a mere 200 episodes. Gotta watch them all! And I don't think that's actually helping. Made even worse that most modern shonen animes are better paced to avoid these scenarios. If any of that sounds intimidating, I guess I would recommend the manga. If I were to give you the option of 100 episodes or 11 manga volumes, I'm pretty sure the latter is a lot more preferable and easier. Also, you get the smug satisfaction online. But a lot of the earlier lore is very disconnected to the stuff that people enjoyed later, as there are more small fish in a big pond. And the towns are pretty lame too. Outside that restaurant location, most of the towns are very small and generic. Possibly even intentionally, since the Grand Line was where all the crazy stuff was meant to happen. Thus, you get the meme it gets better in 300 episodes, with all the really popular arcs being far away. Though much of the earlier stuff does come back in a very big way, and age well. You may not have seen it yet, but soon it's all going to be about One Piece. Will you be ready? Man, doesn't that sound ominous. Now, when you first got into the show, you would probably wonder what's so great about the Grand Line anyways. But after watching it all unfold and taking a step back, and you soon discover that the Grand Line is actually a Super Mario Bros. Game. There's a sand level, there's an ice level, there's a dinosaur level, Candyland level, the Venice level, and look, there's even the bonus stage. There's a spooky level. There's a fire and ice level that happens because of reasons that I'm not allowed to explain. And there's the egg level. I don't know what this is. I'm still at the Wano arc. And who can forget the furry level? And since we're talking about video games, I guess we should actually go to the game part of the actual video. Most One Piece games are pretty bare bones. They are what they are. They're licensed anime games. And not a lot of them are that unique. Some of them can be party games, fighting games, and I've heard there's a fair amount of open world games, which actually sounds kinda neat. But the game I'm looking at today is a very old one. One about the early side of the franchise I talked about, on the Game Boy Color, called One Piece, Birth of Luffy's Dream Pirate Crew. It's not very well known, nor is it all that remembered. It wasn't released outside Japan, however, it was fan-translated. Not helping that it's a real-time strategy game, a genre that I don't really think is fitting for an action series like this, particularly, where every enemy comes in threes, while the other characters are having to chase them around. Now, Luffy specifically can only fight them when they're right next to him, which is fairly odd considering that he has stretchy powers. However, you do have skills where you can use your Gum Gum attacks. The Gum Gum pistol is usually the most useful one. It attacks straight away and uses a lot less MP. There are other attacks, but they're very contextual. The sprites at first look pretty decent, but sadly, this is as good as it gets when it comes visually. Most of the gameplay happens within the grid maps that really aren't very appealing. The music is alright, but the sound effects are really annoying. The game focuses on the East Blue Saga, starting from the Alvida arc that ends with the encounter of Arlong, and you play the game through separate episodes. Some of them are based on the manga itself, like there's the opening Alvida ship, the episode where you free Zoro from Morgan, an episode where you fight Buggy, an episode where you save Syrup Village. You get the picture. And from time to time, you get some fairly decent 16-bit art of some of the chapters. But there are other episodes made specifically for the game. Some of them can be unrelated side stories, while others usually have an excuse of re-encountering a certain town or a villain you fought previously. There's even a scene where Alvida, pre-Devil Fruit, shows herself off in a bikini, and Sanji seems totally okay with it. But he's allowed to hit her. Well, I guess he's dead. Now, this is where scenes get very interesting. In a way, the map is open for you to do this however you want. So when and how you get to it is all up to you. And you get to play around with this as you please. Not only that, you are also allowed 4 other party members, which are usually reserved for Zoro, Nami, Usopp, and Sanji. However, the game allows you to use other crew members besides them. This means that you can sequence breaks throughout the story using whatever crew members you personally choose. So you can skip episodes where you meet Zoro or Nami. So just like how I talked about in the earliest part of the video on how cursed getting into One Piece was, I'm going to continue that trend of being cursed in my actual playthrough. Now, one of the earliest crew members you could get is of course Kobe. Now, Kobe was most likely meant to be a temporary party member. However, he's not too bad. He does have good range in his fighting, which is strange because he has more range than Luffy. And I don't even know what he fights with. Though, unlike Luffy, he doesn't have any special attacks. So yeah, Kobe is my first mate. He is now a full-time pirate, and I ruined his dream just like that. Though there were times I had to progress in the main episodes. I think one of the ones I chose was the Usopp one first, and there I go through the events of the actual arc. Meanwhile, the rich girl ass assassination. Well, Kuro's right, that is a barbaric way to say it. Now by this point, I decided to let Usopp join my crew. He does have some special attacks that I don't really care for, although he does have a larger range than Kobe, which makes sense considering he's a marksman. You could go back to the Syrup Village and recruit the Usopp pirate kids. This is the moment where Luffy becomes big boss. Of course, them being kids, they aren't fairly useful in battles. Like Luffy, they have a very limited hit ratio, but they don't have the ability to make up for it. Who knew hiring children was a bad idea? Later on throughout the game, you also get to recruit that little dog from the town, and he functions almost the exact same way. Now that makes sense, but what doesn't make sense is Johnny and Yosako being like that. You find an episode where you meet some of Zoro's old classmates, and they get to join your crew too, but you would think with them being swordsmen, they would be a little more useful, right? But in gameplay, they function the same way as the kids. But yeah, these two are pretty much equal to children and a dog. But that's just an unfortunate coincidence. So I did finally end up saving Zoro, although I did not bring Kobe with me because I don't want to get rid of him. Sometimes the game will acknowledge certain things, such as having Usopp join in the conversation of freeing Zoro. But it won't acknowledge that I have two of his friends with me. Maybe I should have done Sanji's story first, and then he really would have been the chief. However, getting Zoro tends to reset the map too for some reason. Going back to the crucifix you freed him from, it allows you to get a wanted poster, which is apparently of Gaiman. You know, that dude trapped in the chest guarding the strange animals. Showing him the wanted poster now allows him to join the crew. Since Chopper's not in the game, I guess he's our mascot character. For the most part, Gaiman just acts like another Usopp, so he's far more useful than the Thorman characters. For my main playthrough, I stuck with Kobe, Usopp, Gaiman, and whatever trash I could find. But what about the real main characters? Well, Zoro and Sanji do the same thing that Luffy does. They can only attack while they're right next to them. I guess that does make a little sense, but it is kind of disappointing, especially since I ragged on Johnny and Yakuso for doing the same thing. However, of course, they both have special moves, but like I said, it's very contextual, which I think is the main reason for this game being an RTS. You can do certain attacks at the right moment, but 80% of the time, you just get bored and just do the simplest one instead. Nami, however, operates exactly like Kobe, where she has a more longer range to attack for some reason, making her oddly more useful than Sanji or Zoro in certain circumstances. However, she does lack the skills, as she only has two. One's an attack, and the other is basic sieving. By the way, this has nothing to do with leveling up the characters either, since Sanji and Zoro have all their attacks and I barely use them. Now remember, this was early One Piece, so she wasn't that good of a fighter beforehand. Ironically enough, despite being the weakest character in the show, Usopp is actually quite useful in this game. So he now gets a title as the Chief. As I said before, there are other episodes. Most of the replayable ones involve what happens afterwards. So, in a strange way, the Straw Hats aren't really moving forward, but rather around in circles heading to the Grand Line. Many of them have their own little plotline, like pirates taking over an ocean to get a certain treasure, or going back to Gaiman's island numerous times to fight a hunter. Probably my favorite one where you go back to the Zoro episode, and you meet up with an old pirate coming back to his hometown, only to discover that his brother's a marine and his sister passed away, and later on you get to fight alongside them. Also, these characters are made using generic sprites, so they have actual character while having a stock design. And there's this other side story where this dude's spirit is put to rest once you find a certain treasure. But there are other flaws too, and the worst one is the fact that you can't run in battles. Any random encounters, you have to fight them. And these aren't fights where you can just one-hit KO like in a normal RPG. It takes up a lot of time to do. It's even more so annoying when you're around water, because like the show, Luffy can't swim, so he's very limited in these type of random encounters. And it gets old so fast, to the point where it gets really irritating. Made even worse that most of these episodes involve exploring, on different islands or different areas of the map. It would be fine if every few steps didn't take you to a battle that takes up 2 or 3 minutes of your time. And then there are times where you have no clue what to do and no clue where to go, which makes the random encounters even worse when you're lost. And sometimes there are scripted scenarios that take place in a very precise path. I think there was one time I was scrolling all over the map finding out what to do, only to figure out that I had to land this very specific spot where Luffy and Usopp had to blow up a pillar or something. And this happens a lot in the game too. Also, while Luffy does have his own sprite, many of the other characters don't. Like, I don't recall one for Zoro or Sanji. Oh, come on, I was right there! So many of the times throughout the game, you're searching for some patch of grass or some specific spot around the map. Now I'm sure you're probably wondering if me sequence breaking like this, do the enemies get a lot more difficult? Well, not really. Most of the enemies' levels are tied straight to Luffy. So whatever his level is, the enemies will continue to be around the same level. Like by the end of the playthrough, I am at level 90. Also helps that most of these battles are done unwillingly. The experience bar is very low. The only time I really have any trouble is certain boss fights, where I had to make sure Luffy doesn't die. If his HP is down to 0, then the game's over. Though you could have him or other characters hold some healing items just in case. I mean, I had to have these children and dogs doing something in my crew. Now this stuff isn't a big deal really, but the leveling system does have a lot of flaws, because as I am so leveled up, even when I do get characters like Nami or Sanji in my crew, they are too underleveled to really make a mark, since I've already been using Kobe and Gaiman so much. Gaiman should be likely to have hockey at this point. And despite being at level 90 something, I don't feel very powerful. Like I should be feeling like a god by this point, but it's all too even out. Like I said, there are episodes that rematch the villain characters, like finding Buggy harassing a small chick, or finding Django left behind in the village, or Kuro leaving you in multiple traps to get revenge. But the most noteworthy in my opinion was Captain Morgan's return. He escapes from Marine custody, only to be stranded and starved to a point of attacking pirates as a basic instinct, causing a reputation of him being a ghost ship or something. Even Luffy offers him to be a part of his crew. So just like many of the allies, which at least makes some sense, another thing that's appealing to me about this game is that you can recruit many of the villains in your crew, as long as you have the right item in your inventory. Some of them you have to find on your own for exploring, which can be a massive chore due to the random encounters everywhere. But from time to time, you usually get the item after the episode where you have to fight him again, like the Kuro one, where you do the episode where you fall to his trap and you fight him again, you get the item that unlocks him. You replay the episode a second time, and then they join. I think I got most of them. I got Buggy and the Acrobat to join my crew, but left the Lion Tamer behind. And you also get Morgan's item the same level I talked about too. And Kree comes out of nowhere in the episode where the old guy's spirit gets put to rest. Most of the enemies, just like the Straw Hats, are fairly mixed. Some attack in a weaker range, while others have a longer range attacks. But each one has their own skill from their boss fight. Django stands out the most as he could power up a crew member or hypnotize an enemy as he did in his arc. Luffy would ask a lot of odd characters to join his crew, but I would highly doubt he would go this crazy. Like sure, some of them are kind of inconsequential, but Kuro did try to kill Usopp's friend, so I don't see him joining in. Oh look, they're bonding already. There's even a time where you get to do another episode in Sierra Village, and Kuro reintroduces himself as a part of the Straw Hats, with Kaya and many other characters having the same reaction as the audience, with Usopp having to convince Kaya that Kuro changed. The episode was about a shady doctor, where history appears to repeat itself, alongside Kuro noticing his more questionable actions. However, the episode did not go exactly in that direction. It's a lot more anticlimactic than you'd think. Since Kuro is an optional party member, that character development, quote-unquote, is pretty much dropped. You do this other episode where you go around the map to find this freaking dolphin, and it's so annoying I hate it. And at the very end, an old man at the house brings up Arlong, and Nami just steals the ship and leaves. It's also very strange hearing Jinbei after all these years. By the way, it should be very obvious that the Sanji episode does not link up to this story either. You're automatically forced to go to the Alrong Arc, where it is adapted as well as you think it would be. So together, me and the boys are going to Arlong Park and defeat the evil fishman, so they could stay away from Kokoyashi Village once and for all, and Nami can join our crew once again as a navigator, and she's our beloved friend and companion. Okay, this crew is pretty freaking wild. See, look, they're friends. The battle plays typical as many of the others that came before it. Most of the fights are fairly kind and letting you heal up after a while, but this is the first one to have the strange exception of having two fights back to back. Just in case, I had my Luffy keep his distance and have Usopp and Kuro do all the work. By the way, Usopp did the killing blow on Arlong, and the game ends with the map being reset to replay the episodes. Now that was the final boss, meaning in order to play it again, you have to replay the Dolphin episode, something that you can do anytime when it's available. Now I have heard that Arlong is a playable character, but I have yet to see any real proof of it. The Wikia article also claimed that Panda Man and the bandit that Shanks killed are also recruitable party members. Now Panda Man I'm pretty sure can be possible if I look hard enough. although I have yet to see the bandit anywhere near the game, or at least in a playable state. However, looking at some of the lists within the game itself, it seems that the game has gone more overboard than I thought. I have inventory items that I saw would belong to Gin or Pearl, one of them being a bandana. It implied that some of the other crew members you could get are those cat brothers no one remembers, and some of the staff at the restaurant. And the item I got that goes after Krieg most likely goes for Gin and Arlong. By the way, there's no space in between Zero's friends because they join automatically. But oddly enough, Colby gets an item despite being an automatic recruit. I'm guessing that's just a thing to re-recruit him, I guess, that I obtained by accident. I guess Luffy ruined his dream because he stole his glasses, which I don't think is an issue anymore. This is the exact moment where Luffy becomes an 80s style bully. Speaking of the listings, it also has a log of all the other episodes, and it seems I cleared the Dolphin and Arlong sections, so there's not much to do afterwards. So I highly doubt you could actually recruit Arlong as a party member. It's also really hard to tell because there's almost no information on this game at all, and there's barely any videos on the subject anyways. And anytime I do look for it, I most likely find stuff about the Game Boy Advance game specifically made in America. Now there is a sequel called Grand Line Dream Adventure Log, so unlike the first game, which is a real-time strategy, it's your basic Final Fantasy turn-based instead, taking place where the first one left off. It lets you have numerous guest party members for a temporary time. While it does appear to have a similar structure to the first game, it does bring back many past characters, like bringing Kuro or Krieg into the Alabasta Saga. Well, very early into the Alabasta Saga. It goes from Logtown to Drum Arc. Also, wouldn't this mean you get Chopper late in the game? So you don't even meet other cooler Baroque work members like Bon Clay or Daz Bones or even Crocodile. And this would also mean that Nico Rob wouldn't be playable. So yeah, that's kinda lame. Ironically enough, most of these levels are probably the ones that the 4Kids dub outright skipped. Also, apparently this is one of the last games with the Game Boy Color. Yeah, we don't see Dragon here. While the Dream series is rather flawed, I do think it was a rather unique take on the One Piece property, though sadly the second game isn't fan-translated. And with a premise like this, I can't see too much interest. Though I imagine the concept like this would be very liked in modern-day One Piece, as fans have been anticipating the next crew member in each arc, where most of the time it'll never happen or come to fruition. And by the way, these aren't spoilers, I'm talking about stuff that did not happen. But the game's structure will call for playable characters literally no one asked for. Like, who would want this guy to join the crew? Or this guy? Literally why? Though if you can play as the Cat Brothers, I guess you can play as this dude. If this game was made today, he would probably join the crew because they found his glasses or something. Okay, I actually see a lot of people after this one for some reason. I don't know why. Okay, I'm probably confusing all the people who haven't seen the show yet, because I'm just posting anime characters out of context. But they still do make One Piece RPGs. One of the latest games coming out in the making of this video, One Piece Odyssey, does continue that trend. Now in this game, you are forced to spread out as you fight a group of 3 or 4 enemies at a time. Something that this RPG somewhat does too, granted in a different manner. I know it's kind of a coincidence, but I like the similarity. To make this even more cursed, Netflix is currently making a series based on the early arcs of the anime, which will inspire new fans. Now, not saying that's generally a bad thing, but Netflix anime adaptations aren't exactly the best. While this one does seem to have more care, we don't really know yet, it's 50-50. Also, if there was a season 2, it actually would have focused on the same arcs as the second Dream game I talked about would have covered. So, imagine that. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you want, I can see some other content. Hope to see you soon.